Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Good morning. Do people have any questions about or issues they want, like on past talks I've had, or points that have been bubbling around, or questions about practice? About who to vote for. Okay. I just like to check people. Today I'd like to talk about the permanent. Like Buddhism emphasizes the impermanent a great deal. Everything is impermanent, and we need to become acquainted with the impermanent, and we need to realize the reality of impermanence. That everything is passing away. And that's very important. And it's emphasized a great deal. But today I'd like to talk about the other half of that, and that is the permanent. So the permanent is Nirvana. So let's talk about Nirvana. Nirvana means the permanent. I mean, the Buddha said there exists this reality which is always present, which is always existing. That's what he meant by the permanent. And the first thing that I think is interesting about Nirvana and the permanent are the names that the Buddha would use to describe this. The two words that he would use most frequently are the deathless and the unborn. So the deathless and the unborn. So if you think of the unborn, Nirvana is unborn because it always exists and therefore it does not come into being, at some point in time. So it is unborn or unoriginated. And if you think of the deathless, it does not pass away. So that the unborn and the deathless sort of cover the two ends of it. In the sense of always existing. He tended not to use the word eternal, and I think it's interesting to ask ourselves why he avoided using that word. In fact, there's an interesting discourse in the middle-length discourses. I think it's the Lesser Discourse to Malenka, I forgot his name, anyway, where there's a discussion about whether or not the universe exists eternally, whether or not the Buddha exists eternally, and the Buddha declines to answer the question of his disciple, saying that such questions are not conducive to enlightenment and are not conducive to the cessation of suffering. And there are actually maybe half a dozen discourses where the Buddha declines to respond when somebody asks him about the nature of the eternal. And yet he would also say on a number of occasions that there exists the unborn and there exists the deathless. So what's the distinction that he's making between the unborn and the deathless and the eternal? It's my opinion that the reason the Buddha shied away from using the word eternal to describe nirvana is that there's a very strong tendency for people to think, when they use the word eternal, to think of an eternally existing thing. To immediately assume that the eternal is some entity or some existing or existent. So in the context in which the Buddha taught, that would most likely be a deity, And because of that, the pull of that kind of inference, he pulled away, from describing the unborn and the undying as the eternal. But I think it is a good synonym, in our context, to describe the deathless and the unborn as the eternal. So just to give a flavor for the Buddha's, when he did talk about Nirvana, it's some of the passages are quite beautiful. This is from the Udana. The Udana means verses of uplift, or uplifting verses, and it's a collection of the Buddha's greatest hits. That somebody put together a long time ago. There is, monks, that base where there is no earth, no water, no fire, no air, no base consisting of the infinity of space, no base consisting of the infinity of consciousness, no base consisting of nothingness, no base consisting of neither perception nor non-perception, neither this world nor another world, nor both, neither the sun nor the moon. Here, monks, I say there is no coming, no going, no staying, no deceasing, no uprising. It is not fixed, it is not mutable, it is not movable, and it has no support. Just this is the end of suffering. One other verse. There is, monks, a not born, a not brought to being, a not made, a not conditioned. If, monks, there were no not born, not brought to being, not made, not conditioned, no escape would be discerned from what is born, brought to being, made, and conditioned. But since there is a not born, a not brought to being, a not made, a not conditioned, therefore an escape is discerned from what is born, brought to being, made, and conditioned. So the second one is that very logical kind of discourse that the Buddha liked to engage in. So I think it's worth investigating. What is the meaning of nirvana? I mean, this is fraught with danger. And fraught with the possibility of misunderstanding. But even to have a glimpse of the ultimate goal that the Buddha was speaking of clarifies the direction of our journey. And so I think it can provide a wonderful support for our practice to have at least some inkling of what the Buddha meant by the deathless and the unborn, the not fixed, the not mutable. Yeah? So if nirvana is the permanent and the unborn and the deathless, I discern in the Buddhist tradition two interpretations of what that means. It's kind of the first, split or divergence in understanding of the Buddha Dharma. One interpretation of the permanent is that the permanent equals the unchanging. What's interesting is in those passages I just read, the Buddha doesn't use the term unchanging, which I think is interesting. Because in that long list it would have been easy to insert that. But there is an interpretation of the permanent as the unchanging. It's easy to see why. The leaves on the tree are not permanent, and they change, right? So the leaves and everything, when we investigate impermanence as part of our practice, it's the passing away, and so there's a tendency to equate permanence with the unchanging. Yeah? Another interpretation of permanence is the constant. Right? Now, at first, that seems awfully close, but the divergence is this: the constant, interpreting the permanent as the constant, allows for the idea that change itself is the permanent condition. So it allows for that interpretation. So if you, for example, read the Uttara Tantra, there's a great deal of emphasis on the idea of nirvana as unchanging, nirvana as the absolute which never changes. But if you read Zen Master Dogen, who's a marvelous elucidator of the second point of view, he will come to this dramatic conclusion in one of his essays: impermanence itself is Buddha nature. Impermanence itself is Buddha's nature. And his writings are filled with metaphors for Buddha nature, which I take as another name for nirvana, that are like plum blossoms, mountains, flowing streams, those kinds of metaphors for that which is permanent. If you understand permanent and nirvana as the constant, this is consistent. If you interpret the permanent as the unchanging, then you're wondering how that can happen. From another spiritual tradition, the Taoist spiritual tradition, you can look at how translators have focused in on the Chinese character for the eternal. The Chinese character is Chang. I'm not pronouncing it right because I don't know tones, but the opening two lines of the Tao Te Ching, Dao Ku Dao Fai Chang Dao. Chang, that's the one I'm talking about. So it means the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. So the Tao that can be named is not the deathless and the unborn Tao. So almost every translator will, in those first two lines, will translate Chang as eternal. Dao Ku Dao Fai Chang Dao. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The second line is Ming Kuo Ming Fai Chang Ming. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Later on in the Tao Te Ching, translators will translate that same character as the unchanging. Some. Other translators will translate that same character as the constant. Okay? There's all sorts of ways. Now, what's interesting about this is that the decision that the translator makes about whether or not to render that character as the constant or whether or not to render that character as the unchanging brings with it a whole metaphysical view of what the eternal means. And determines how you're going to interact with that text. It's very interesting. If you know that, it's very helpful. You can kind of see what they're doing. I'm not saying that they're doing it consciously. They're not approaching the translation with the idea in mind of presenting to you their metaphysical view, because most people's metaphysical views are unconscious. But if you can see through that pivot, you can see how a view of ultimate reality or a view of nirvana is embedded in these kind of very early decisions. Yeah?
Okay, the Chinese itself is a translation from, I guess it would be Tibetan text.
No, Taoism is Chinese.
Okay. That corresponds. My question was whether the earlier text, the Chinese Bible, used specific words that had different interpretations that we further interpreted in English.
Yes. I mean, there are examples of that also. There's a Taoist text called, a Tibetan text called, I can never pronounce these Tibetan words. It's one of those words with 6 consonants in a row. But anyway. And the translator in the introduction renders a key Tibetan term as being. Okay, the English word being. But in the introduction, she says that by being, she means dynamic spinning. Okay, so it's very interesting. I don't know of any English reader who would read the word being and think of dynamic spinning. So like, but see what so like the Western philosophical tradition interprets being as unchanging, as an unchanging ultimate reality. That's that's what the Western philosophical tradition means. But I can see how the translator did this. It's like this term in this text means ultimate reality. Ultimate reality in the Western philosophical tradition is named by being. Therefore, I'm going to use the term being to describe it. In the introduction, I'll explain that I mean something that no one ever would think of. But how many people read the introduction? So, I'm just trying to. This may seem highly abstract, but the consequences of these early decisions unfold in one's practice, because if nirvana means the unchanging, then it is somewhere else than the world in which we dwell. Okay? So that world of, rising suns and falling blossoms and crying babies and passing cars. If nirvana is the constant, which allows for change itself and process itself as an aspect of the meaning of nirvana, then nirvana permeates all of our existence. It's me, it's you, it is the car, it is the rising sun, it is a full moon on a November night. Yeah. So even though it seems like a very abstract consideration, it has profound implications for the direction of our practice, and that's why I think it's worthy of investigation. It's like nirvana may seem very, very far away in terms of realization. Even if you come to the philosophical conclusion that it pervades everything. But it's sort of like if you're on this journey and there's this mountain in the distance, is it that mountain or is it that mountain is going to determine a lot of decisions that you make on the way. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? Or,
Does the nirvana as constant permeating everything, is that similar to the deity or love or being both immanent and transcendent in the Western tradition? Is that?
That's a big question. I'm to be honest with you, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Do you think there's a homology between there might be?
I think it would be possible to work one out. I'm not well versed enough in Western theology, to be able to answer that question articulately. So Buddhism, the Buddhist tradition has both these interpretations, though, of nirvana. Nirvana as the unchanging and nirvana as the constant. Which is interesting to me that Buddhism is capacious enough to hold both of these points of view. That's because the Buddha's emphasis in his teaching was always on the cessation of suffering. Metaphysical considerations came second. So in that discourse that I mentioned, where he refused to answer questions about the eternal, I always feel that it was like the Buddha was shy about answering those kinds of questions when somebody, was trying to fixate a point of view, that's where they sort of where they wanted to tie things down and make them produce some kind of fixed doctrine. Then I sense the Buddha would withdraw, from that kind of interchange. But there are other passages where, he does elucidate the nature of the unborn, the nature of the deathless, and recommends contemplation on the deathless. And there I feel it's like the disciple was receptive to that they weren't going to force this idea of nirvana or this experience of nirvana into some sort of fixed doctrine. And that's why you get these kind of variations in response. If we understand that nirvana is not an eternally existing thing, it helps us to understand why the Buddha avoided using the word eternal. I feel his reasoning behind avoiding using that word was very similar to his reasoning for avoiding the use of the word self. So the Buddha taught the teaching of non-self, right? The tendency when people hear the word self is to think of an egoic self or a separately existing self. The core realization of the Buddha in his enlightenment was the realization of the interconnectedness of all existing things. Yeah? So everything was interconnected. So when he uses the term non-self, he means no separately existing self. Yeah? And that is what he was getting at. Now, at the time that he was teaching, the term Atman, which we translate as self, meant a separately existing self. Among the Brahmins and the Jains with which he was contemporary, that was their meaning. So it was very clear to him that there was a distinction between what he was teaching and what others were teaching. Unfortunately, we're not in ancient India, and there aren't a lot of Jains and Brahmins around to contrast. So the tendency is that when we hear the word non-self, that we hear that we don't exist at all. I call that extending the negation too far. Extending the negation too far. The Buddha wasn't saying that we don't exist. He was saying we don't separately exist. Similarly, he wasn't saying the eternal doesn't exist. He was saying the eternal does not exist as a thing or as a separately existing thing. I'm trying to make that comparison. A third example would be emptiness. Emptiness does not mean that things do not exist. It means that things do not exist inherently or separately. To say that emptiness means that things do not exist is once again extending the negation too far. And so let me give an ordinary example of extending the negation too far so that my meaning will be clearer. I have a friend, but we hadn't seen each other for about 6 years, and he came for a visit, and his name is John, and he said to me, I always remembered that red couch of yours. So I said to him, I don't have a red couch. You must be thinking of someone else. So he says, I was sure you had a couch. So John was extending the negation too far. I was negating red. He was negating couch. So you understand the mechanism? You probably can think of times in your own life when that's happened, when you've either done that to someone or someone has done that to you. It's a cause of a lot of misunderstanding, common in ordinary conversation. Within the Buddhist tradition, the misunderstanding is very similar on the part of people. Emptiness, therefore things don't exist. But that's not what's being negated. What I'm getting at is that it's necessary to gain some clarity about the object of negation. Nirvana is the fourth example. The word nirvana means to extinguish. So it's from a Sanskrit word which means to blow out, as in to blow out a candle. There are some Buddhist traditions who interpret that as meaning to extinguish existence. That when existence is extinguished, there is nirvana. So, which is, if you go back to that, the meaning of the permanent as the unchanging, it would be consistent with that. You have to extinguish everything which changes, and then nirvana emerges. So this view of nirvana as extinction and extinguishing is another example of extending the negation too far. The Buddha was quite specific about what he wanted people to extinguish. He wanted them to extinguish grasping, greed, hatred. He wanted them to extinguish fixation. He wanted them to extinguish the idea of a permanently existing thing. But you don't read in the discourses that the Buddha says, and now we shall proceed to extinguish existence. When he talks about extinguishing, he has something very specific in mind. And to extend that to existence as such, in my opinion, is another one of those kinds of mistakes. Of extending the negation too far. Does this make sense? What I'm referring to? So, if we understand the unborn and the deathless as the eternal, the word that I use for the eternal is the every when. So, the eternal exists every when, right? Or always. It exists always, it is deathless, it is unborn, and then the question is, where is the every when? Where is it? If it exists, if Nirvana, the deathless, the unborn, Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it, if it always exists, why can't we see it? One answer to that is that, well, it's not here, it's over there. So by over there I mean heaven, or some other realm, or some other reality, that. So you can see how that, if you think of the eternal as the every when, it's not difficult to understand the conclusion that is drawn from that that the every when is somewhere else. It's certainly not here. I'm not every when, you're not every when, this cushion isn't every when, so where is it? And off we go, looking for it, and hoping to arrive at it. This leads to strongly dualistic views of existence. Ultimate nature is something other than what we normally experience. Ultimate nature, ultimate reality, whether that is God, nature, the transcendent being, essence, but whatever name is put to it, is utterly unlike anything that we experience. And this leads to programs that are like extinction or extinguishing, or the whittling away of our experience until experience is extinguished. I have a friend who's a meditation teacher in a Hindu tradition, and his beginning approach is that if it changes, it is not true. If it changes, it's not ultimate. Therefore, it is not this, it is not this, it is not this, it is not this. Very, very, very systematic, approach. It's based in that, in that understanding of the every when as not located here. Those Buddhist traditions which interpret nirvana as the constant, as opposed to the unchanging, equate. They have a different interpretation of the every when, and the different interpretation is that they equate the every when with the everything. So how is that done? It's done this way. If there were no things, there would be no when. So, if things did not exist, when would not exist. Now, the tendency that we have is to think of time as a container in which things happen. The time is like a neutral presence in which things happen. But this view of existence understands time as the unfolding of things. Like that there would be no time, there would be no when, unless things existed. Yeah? So that is, in Dogen's essay on being time, that is his point. It's like, like time is my left elbow. Time is a statue in the garden. Time is a pine tree. Like everything that exists is time. And so if you equate the every when with the everything, then the two come together, right? And the every when is that which permeates all existing things. You can look at it from the point of view of the Heart Sutra. So, all things are marked by emptiness. All things are marked by emptiness. So this perspective sees nirvana or ultimate nature or Buddha nature not as timeless but as pan-temporal. Yeah. Okay. The first view that the every when is located someplace else understands ultimate nature as timeless. As beyond time. Unchanging. Serene, still, motionless. Boring. But by pan-temporal, I mean encompassing all time, not separate from time, but permeated by past, present, and future, by all modes of time. Now, if the ultimate exists in everything, it also exists everywhere. That is, there is no place you can turn where the eternal is not present. Isn't that wonderful? You can't, you can't escape the presence of the eternal, which I think is very nice. Everywhere and everything, every when. If there were no things, there would be no where. If there were no things, there would be no when. So, eternal is here, now, it's you, it's me, it's this floor, it's that ceiling, and there it is, yeah? So, yeah?
Is it ever a conception of Buddhist cosmology of a universe before things came into being or after things ceased to come into being, in which case there would be no eternal by that definition?
But I guess I would respond to that question by returning to the core insight of the Buddha as the dependently arising nature of all things. That all things arise due to causes and conditions. So all things are marked by emptiness because they're marked by their dependently arising nature. Yeah. So it is not that things create existence. Okay? It's that or eternity. It is that the dependently arising process of becoming and becoming in things the world. Yeah. So things are not things in the sense of separately existing things or categorical things. Things are things due to the dependently arising and becoming and becoming nature.
I'm just see, the concept that I'm coming up with the talk is that you have this continual flux, and everything within the flux changes, but the flux itself is always there. So far, I hope that's consistent with what you're saying. And so you have eternity because you always have the flux, even though it's always taking new shapes and sizes and colors and so on. But I wonder whether Buddhist cosmology ever says there's something outside of the flux.
No. not to my knowledge. So, really.
To follow up on that, I mean, there's a whole perspective on which Buddhism is scientific, empirical, not metaphysical. It's about that which exists. And if one examines the statements about Buddha, about what came before or where did it come from, and his refusing to answer and saying in that way lies madness. From that kind of even Western empirical perspective, these are logical empirical answers. We can only know that the existence of which we are part of, and if there's some other existence, someplace or sometime other, then even Buddha doesn't know that. It's not knowable, and the metaphor of, it seems to me, as you've been talking, that keeps coming to mind is that of the ocean and waves. Though of course the ocean isn't internal, really, but let's leave that aside. And from one kind of perspective, the ocean is always there. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, one can imagine as a wave, it's not always there at all. It's a storm. I'm about to die. I'm getting bigger. I'm getting smaller. So these are ways of understanding the existence in which we are interdependently.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, the statement you often hear that there's no difference between nirvana and samsara.
Yes.
Where does that come from?
That
What's
comes
the
from
context?
That comes from understanding that nirvana means that which exists everywhen, that which exists everywhere, and that which exists as everything. Now, I said this before, but the question is, if that's really true, then why do we have to practice? Why do we have to, if it's really, if all things are marked with emptiness, if all things have Buddha nature, then, why don't we see it? And the reason is that which marks all existing things is difficult to perceive. In a way, you can look at it this way. What is it that all things have in common? What is it that all things share? So you take a cushion, the sound of a bell, the smell of pine incense, the touch of sand, the taste of cinnamon, and a mathematical function. So, what do they all have in common? Anything? So, it's necessary to take this idea that all things are marked with Buddha nature seriously and investigate that. Not just visual things, not just sonic things, not just things that we touch, not just things that we think about, dream things, imaginary things, even delusional things exist. What does it mean to exist? To exist means that something has a function and an influence. So ideas exist. This cushion exists, but how does it exist? Well, they exist as dependently arising phenomena. So the task is to shift our attention from what I call the circumstantial manifestations, to the transcendental manifestations. By transcendental, I mean that which all of them have in common. The shifting of our attention from the fact that the sound is a sound, or the cushion is comfortable, or that is an ongoing task. Though I believe that it happens spontaneously to people, without necessarily a background in spiritual practice. The purpose of Buddhist practice is to draw our attention to the presence of eternity. To draw our attention to the presence of eternity. And this is accomplished through many different means. Meditation is one way. So meditation, say in the Zen tradition, you observe the arising and disappearing of all mental phenomenon. And every single existing thing is like that. So all things are marked by that quality. So everything has that in common. That's what the Dogen meant when he said impermanence is Buddha nature. The presence of that becoming and beginning is itself the transcendental. Is itself the ultimate, is itself the eternal. So how to shift one's attention, from the circumstantial to the transcendental, that is the task, and it is an ongoing task. It is an ongoing task and a path and a cultivation because normal everyday life is very concerned and steeped in concerned with circumstantial presentation. This makes sense. It's not like there's like some diabolical conspiracy. It concerns me whether or not this room is white or blue. It concerns me whether or not my car is green or white. It concerns me whether or not this cushion is hard or soft. But that focus makes it difficult for me to perceive, and this is the key, to perceive the presence of eternity. So what I'm getting at is that the dependent nature of all existing thing is something you can actually perceive. The becoming and beginning of things, all things, that is a quality that you can actually perceive. And when you do so, it is wonderful. There you are, in the presence of eternity. It will lift your spirits, bring peace to your heart, and serenity to your mind. It's the best. But orgasm is minor in comparison. So,
the idea that comes to my mind is thinking of concepts, from our culture, like justice, and freedom, and I'm cogitating about them as you're talking, thinking about, are these things universals always true? They're related to ending suffering in a sense, but I don't know if you have anything to say about them at all, but it's sort of what I'm sort of thinking a lot about, in my practice, manifesting myself as an agent because of a concern maybe with ending suffering, but manifesting myself as a person who's working towards justice for prisoners, and so on, homes, whatever you want to say. That's sort of what my practice is too,
You want to give me out a pause here and say something practical?
No, in a way, yeah. But also trying to make, for myself, always trying to make the relationship between acting.
So, to me, there's a very strong connection between this kind of investigation and those kinds of manifestations, because injustice and arises out of a sense of separation. If all existing things are marked by the presence of eternity, then all sentient beings are equal. All sentient beings are a source of wisdom. Not just that they're all equal. They're all a fountainhead of realization. Upon that basis, it's possible to build a sense of social justice and a sense of equality. In Buddhist history, it hasn't always panned out that way, but I believe that it would be completely consistent, with a Buddhist view to express it in that way. And in truth, I think, when you read about the Buddha's, when he does comment about social relations, And it's surprising how often he does. The reason it's surprising is because we have an image of the Buddha as kind of aloof and above it all. And we miss it that he does comment on his social situation very often. But the way he does it within the context of caste. And so we live in a culture where caste is not the mode of injustice in our culture, and so we tend to miss how often the Buddha addresses that, and it's very often, but he's very. It's very interesting the way he addresses it. What he'll do is he'll say, a Brahmin is someone who. And, a Brahmin is someone who's nice and not mean. And, a Brahmin is someone who is on the path and has acquired certain spiritual insights and that sort of thing. Now, what his audience in India would have known immediately and would have heard is that he is not saying that a Brahmin is someone who's born into a particular family. And has a particular... he's, in other words, he's deliberately using a very loaded term for his culture and attaching a definition to it that would not be ordinary, and saying, this is what I mean by Brahman. A Brahman is someone who has these characteristics. Anyone can have those characteristics. The implication is, so it was actually a very strong statement, and he made it very persistently. So I view that kind of relationship as very, very consistent with the Buddha's own teachings and his the way he set up his community, and that's it.
How they made the rules.
Right. Yes, exactly. It was even down into those kinds of details. But what I want to emphasize is that. I believe that his sense of the equality of all beings arose out of that insight that he had into dependent origination, impermanence, and nirvana. That was the fountainhead for his capacity to express compassion to all sentient beings. If justice is not grounded in a metaphysical, I mean metaphysical in the traditional sense, not the New Age sense. If justice is not grounded in a metaphysical insight into the equality of all, then it very swiftly evolves into something like vengeance. In fact, it becomes almost indistinguishable. And that plunges us back into what the Buddha meant by samsara. That wearisome and very that realm of suffering in which people are keeping score and fighting back with each other, and no one even remembers when it all started. So. Is that responsive to your question? So this shift of attention, that's my conception of, or my understanding of what the Buddhist path is about. And this shift of attention so that our hearts and our minds open to the presence of eternity. When our hearts and minds open to the presence of eternity, or the presence of nirvana, then it shifts our perspective of what is meaningful, what is valuable. This, even a small glimpse of that, is profoundly transformative. Just realizing that there is that dimension to existence, and that you and I are an aspect of that. Is profoundly liberating. And as I said before, it will lift your spirits. It will bring peace to your heart and serenity to your mind. So I hope that we will all practice hard, and that we will get a glimpse of the presence of eternity and save all sentient beings from suffering. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.